Hey everyone, my name is Eric Jones. Welcome to the course entitled Pesticide Hazards in Landscape and First Aid. This course has been given a course number of 2684 from the North Carolina Landscape Contractors Licensing Board. This course does not give credit for pesticides or irrigation credit, only North Carolina Landscape Contractors. This course was recorded as a live webinar that we do on Tuesdays entitled Turf Talk Tuesdays. So any reference to pesticide license or irrigation license does not refer or relate back to course number 2684 approved by the Landscape Contractors Board. So sit back, relax, enjoy the content. There are questions, comments, and concerns from the webinar attendees, which is always good to hear. And so I will see you at the end of the lecture for a recap instructing you how to take the quiz and download your proof of attendance. Some pesticide hazards and some first aid that we can use and what to look for when applying these pesticides in springtime. Summertime is just right around the corner, and a lot of the symptoms and signs that we would see with a pesticide exposure is going to also be very similar to like heat exhaustion, heat stress, heat stroke, and even, cardiac arrest. So we're going to kind of look at the things, pertaining to a pesticide exposure that may, lead us to believe that it is a pesticide exposure. And if we have one of our technicians or ourselves have a mishap and are exposed to it, what's the one thing that we need to take or give to EMS when they arrive on scene about that pesticide applicator? They need to know exactly what he's spraying or she is spraying. So hopefully you guys are keeping good records and you've got good, clean copies of your labels in the vehicle. I like, keeping a good hard notebook, 3-ring binder that I can keep all of those in. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the main slide. So we will know the different types of effects pesticides can have on your health. And, we see it every night, on the news and everything that we watch. People talking about, especially, with Roundup, what is the issues with that? And nowadays, it doesn't seem like we're spraying as much of the bad stuff as we did back in the days. When our first license came about. I remember my dad, spraying, paraquat all the time and other chemicals. And when my grandmother died and we were going through everything at the farm, we were finding, pesticides that were in glass jars, no label intact or anything like that. My dad literally could open the bottle, sniff it, and be like, this is such and such. And so we had to, correctly get rid of all of those glass jars and everything because, they were hazardous to the farm, hazardous to us, any grandkids, cousins that would have been around. So we had to get rid of that. We will know the routes of exposure and how these pesticides can actually enter our body. It's unbelievable the things that we do that we're not even thinking about on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And even when we have, possibly some pesticides on our hands, we didn't wash it. When we go to the restroom, we're always supposed to wash our hands when we, before we leave the restroom. But when we're an applicator, we need to wash our hands before we actually use the restroom because we don't want to, have an exposure, a dermal exposure by touching, parts of our body where we may get 100% absorption of the pesticide. We will recognize symptoms of exposure. What is it? What does it look like? What does it look like, for ourselves? Or if we see one of our employees, one of our technicians actually applying a pesticide, what do we need to look for if they have, came in contact with that chemical? And then know when and how to give first aid. And I truly, truly believe that every single one of us needs to have our technicians and our employees, even our landscape crews, they need to know CPR. They need to know basic first aid because we mess with some dangerous equipment, and we also definitely have these chemicals there for us. Paul just got you into the class, promoted you a panelist. Please accept. Mr. Martinez, please accept the invitation to join as a panelist. That is required again by NCDA. So, with pesticides in humans, insects, rodents, and humans, we have very similar nervous, circulatory, and respiratory systems. So, pesticides do affect people too. That's why in the Army, we practiced a lot of our medical stuff on goats, very similar, airway tract that we were able to do some practicing on. And how we kill these living creatures, these living organisms, as we see here, the black ant being an insect, we're spraying an insecticide that's literally more than likely just going to mess with the nervous system so that insect basically shakes itself to death. When we use a rodenticide to, get rid of or exclude these mice and things of that nature, what does that pesticide actually do? I'm on a pesticide literally right now for life, and it's the same stuff that is actually found in a rodenticide. What is that? What are we doing with these mice when we're trying to kill them? Blood thinner. They bleed to death. So I'm on blood thinner for life. And, but basically what we're doing is we're giving a pesticide and setting them in traps that the mice will actually internally bleed themselves out. And so when we do, set baits and stuff like that, we've got to be very careful for kids. We've got to be very careful for other wildlife, and definitely our pets. For some reason, dogs are attracted to that bait as well, or they may even find these mice after they've already killed the mice with the blood thinner. The dogs may eat the mouse, and then they're going to have the same effects. I woke up one morning with Shiloh, my black lab, like literally just coughing up blood. When he urinated, he peed the blood, and it was all over the house. I mean, all over the house. And what had happened, our neighbor had chickens, and she had set out some rat bait, and he had actually, went over there. Of course, he likes to roam the farm and stuff like that, but he had found either a dead mouse or got some of the bait and actually ate it. And he spent 3 days in an emergency vet where they had to watch him and bring his blood levels back. But it was a very, very scary thing for him to actually have that. And when we are exposed to some of these pesticides, we can either have short or even long-term effects long after the exposure. And we also can be exposed to physical and chemical risk, whether it's explosive or a combustible. And so we're supposed to keep 3 lists of all the pesticides that we have in our possession, in our shop. So we want a list of the pesticide storage facility itself right there hanging on the wall so we can grab it, look and see exactly what we have. We want a clean copy in our office, and we also want to give a copy to our local fire departments. We don't want those young men and women actually coming to our shop and trying to put a fire out, and we've got some really combustible stuff in there. We want to protect them at all possible. Mr. Martinez, no, I cannot see you. Mr. Hughes, guys, just kind of turn your cameras on. Y'all don't want to get a letter from NCDA saying, hey, we didn't see you in the video.
How do you turn the camera on?
Do what? How do
do you
you?
turn the
It should be down at the very bottom. It should be, you'll see a little microphone, and then right beside it, like a little video icon. And it's probably like got a red arrow through it.
I don't see it.
And it may look just a little different. Can anybody else tell them what it looks like from y'all's end? Because I'm the actual host. It may be just a little bit different on my end.
Mine's the same.
It's the same. Okay, so you see the microphone and the camera. Yep.
Microphone and camera on the left side at the bottom.
I
Yep.
see that it says stop video.
Yeah, click on that.
Okay. Now it has a red line through it.
Hmm.
Let me see.
And you may have to select the camera. So if you there's a little drop down arrow, and you should be able to see where it says select camera. And if you've got like a laptop that's got a camera and then you've got a webcam plugged up to that or something, it'll have multiple. But
Working on
anyway,
it.
all right. Brendan, yes, I did see you. All right, so a hazard, we're facing these every single day. And basically a hazard is toxicity times the exposure. And so risk is basically termed the potential for injury. So every time we're applying a pesticide, we have the potential for an injury. Every time we get on a tractor, believe it or not, when I was at Waterpalooza back in the fall, we had an OSHA guy come and speak to us. And like the number one cause of death for landscapers, these past so many years was drowning, where guys were operating tractors, skid steers, even mowers around bodies of water, and the embankments were so steep that they turned the machine over and they rode the machine into the water and got pinned underneath it. So, we face a lot of risk every day in the green industry. But with your toxicity, it is the capacity of a pesticide to cause injury. Now, you can have low toxicity or you can even have high toxicity, but it's that exposure or the number of times that you are exposed to it. So a low toxic pesticide with repeated use can eventually build up on you, and it definitely builds up on our PPE that we must clean or change out every so often. And so this exposure is basically the risk of the pesticide contacting or entering your body. And so with the higher toxicity, is a greater hazard always. Lower toxicity, less hazardous. When you have a higher exposure, it is greater hazard, and lower exposure is equal to less hazard. And you can see here, spraying the Christmas trees, is a very dangerous situation. But the young man is taking all the precautions. He's got a hooded vent. He's probably got a self-contained breathing apparatus strapped to his back. Almost looks like it's there, but he is being supplied with fresh air, so he's not taking any risk of breathing in any of those mixtures right there. And for Adane, we're looking at an insecticide here, and trying to see, it is a restricted use pesticide, and it is a danger poison peligro. So, with that, we have a restricted use pesticide, meaning that it's going through some strict EPA testing. They've tested it in numerous ways, one being how it remains in the environment after it's applied. But a restricted use pesticide can only be purchased by a licensed applicator. So we would be going to purchase it for our technicians to be used. They could actually apply it, but they're not going to be able to go and pick it up because they're going to have to look at our pesticide license and log it in their book every time they sell a restricted use pesticide. So no homeowner can go and get it. They can't go to Site One. They can't go to Green Resource and purchase these restricted use pesticides without a pesticide license. And furthermore, this being a danger poison pesticide, it's got a double dose of being some bad stuff. So you are probably witnessing the guy here actually put that out and having to wear all the PPE with it. But another thing that we actually, come across every single day is gasoline. It has high toxicity, but we have a very low exposure risk. Yes, we may get some on us. I hate it when you put the nozzle in the car, the truck, and you walk away and you've got it, clicked down and it doesn't, shut off in time and a little bit spills out. You may get some on your hands, or, when we're mixing our 2-cycle and and filling up our gas cans there, we may get a little bit on us, but it's not that dangerous. But thinking about aspirin, low toxicity, but it does have a high exposure risk, because what if a child was to get into this aspirin and eat several of them? It's, colorful. They're yellow or they're bright white. So if they can actually get in that bottle, they would just start eating them. Same thing with a pet. So it is low toxic, but we do have a high exposure risk. And when we're actually mixing and loading, we're dealing with the concentrates. And so here we have a young lady. She is, wearing the proper PPE. She would want to have possibly some goggles even underneath that face shield, maybe just even sunglasses. And I've always asked the ag inspectors, what does IPRO, what do you guys consider safe? And they're like, we will allow you to wear the sunglasses if they are the like full wraparound, the whole eye is covered. They're like, we know everybody, wants to wear sunglasses and they don't want to wear the goggles necessary. But where can we find out if we do have to wear goggles or not?
Label.
Those going to be in the label. Exactly. And so you need to read those labels. If I'm applying a pesticide, I'm probably going to print one out and I'm going to read it the day before. I'll read it while I'm watching TV or something, but I want to kind of go through it and maybe even highlight some of this stuff and put it in my 3-ring binder the next morning in the truck. But I want to be up to date. I want to see if anything's changed from last year. Did they require more PPE, or did they require less? Sometimes, things are going to change, so you want to check it. And here, the young lady, she is having to wear the apron. She's got the gloves. She's got the full face mask, and she's even got coveralls underneath like that apron that she's got on. And she may not have to wear all that when she's applying the pesticide. So anytime we're loading or mixing our chemicals, we're at a greater risk of being exposed to them. And so here you do have a very high single exposure. She could spill the concentrate if she didn't have those gloves. She could have got it on her hands, and even washing it or whatever, you're probably still going to have a little bit over it. And then what if she went and ate her lunch? A lot of this can be very dangerous and we not even know it. And we can have some danger after many exposures over time. And I think, I hate to really think this, but, losing my dad to cancer, I'm wondering if a lot of that was from the chemicals that he has sprayed, not only during his landscape career, but, being, the child of a farmer. He grew up on the farm and they were applying pesticides and doing everything. And they never wore the PPE that we do today. And my dad never did, towards the end of his career. He just did not wear that stuff. Whereas, the young folks that we have working for us, they're all about taking care of themselves. The older generation just never did. And so after repeated exposures, is there a buildup in your system? Even with just the simplicity of Roundup, over and over again. Reduce your hazards. We can do that by using the least toxic pesticides. And thank goodness that, in lawn care, we're not using too much of a dangerous pesticide. Everything is a little bit safer. When we're spraying for weeds and, we're putting out our fertility. It's not like spraying an insecticide on the entire yard. And if we do put out an insecticide, we're probably going to put out granular or whatever, and we can wear a dust mask and goggles, and we're pretty
there we go.
safe.
You got me now?
Paul. I can see you. Yep.
All right. Sorry about that.
It's all right. And then always wear your personal protective equipment. Minimum requirements is, long pants. You'd want to have rubber boots. You don't want to wear cowboy boots or anything leather like that that's going to absorb it and, stay, on your feet like that. So you want the rubber boots. The pull-ons or slip-ons are fine. And then, long pants. I know our guys will rip holes in their pants. They'll do it on purpose. And heck, some of them even buy them with the holes in it. They can't do that. That's why I love the uniforms, and using a uniform service. They can provide enough where your technicians can have a clean, pair of pants, long sleeve shirt every single day, and they don't have to take those pesticide exposed clothes home. They can stay at the shop. The uniform company will pick them up, once a week, whatever the schedule is, and they'll take it and they will professionally clean it. And so your guys have clean stuff to wear every single day. Now, the problem with our PPE is we may need to change it a lot sooner than we do. We like to stretch it as much as possible. If it's disposable, one-time use, guys, you got to throw it away. You can't keep using it. Get rid of it, throw it away, and have new on hand. If it needs to be cleaned every day, like your respirators, you need to clean it and you need to let them hang dry, and you need to change out the filters. The gloves, same thing. Wipe them down, wash them off, let them dry, and they need to be thoroughly inspected. And if you start seeing like jelly-like material on it or cracks in the gloves, holes or anything like that, it's time to throw it away. And remember that your hazard is the toxicity times the exposure. So if our PPE is worn, torn, or just, needs to be replaced, we need to do that because we are at hazard of the exposure. Attitude will always make a difference. Read and follow the label carefully. That's why, like I said, I like reading it the night before. Be aware of the people and the environment in and around treated areas. Now, you may be driving through a neighborhood, applying pesticides. You go to the end of the street, make a right turn to do the next one, and then you notice, hey, there is a schoolhouse. If it's any type of wind or, chance of drift, you may want to skip that yard. You don't want to, you got to be especially careful around the schools, elderly homes, restaurants. What if you're, near a vet where, some of the drift or whatever can get over, or, pets in the family yard, or worse is the neighbor's yard that may run over after the application. So always be looking, always notice what's going on around you, and there may have to be a decision made whether or not you make that application or come back at a later date. With poisoning effects, you can have contact, systemic, or allergic. We're going to go over each one of these in general. And usually contact, basically means, hey, it's got on your skin, it's got in your eyes, you've got it in your mouth, nose, throat, or whatever, but that is your contact. And so if it gets on our skin, we're going to have, an irritation, called dermatitis. You may have itching. You'll definitely have some redness. You may develop rashes, even blisters, or even a burn. Some of these chemicals can burn you. If it gets in your eyes, they could swell, they could sting, and they'll definitely be burning. And you want to make sure that you have, some of those eye wash bottles or whatever, in your truck, especially, even if it does require that goggles are wore, it is the, it's totally, drew a blank. But the government does require that we have an emergency eye wash station, which can be just the squirt bottles to rinse out the eyes. But if you get it in your nose, in your mouth, or on your throat, you're going to have an irritation. And then typical of herbicides, fungicides, and other products, all of this is going to happen. And so, guys, we may get it on our fingers, and then we go and grab, our sandwich at lunch where we didn't wash our hands good enough. That's how we can get it in our mouth. That's how we can get it in our throat. And you got to be very, very careful with that. Like I said, even go into the restroom, you've got to wash your hands before using the restroom, because you're going to have 100% exposure, there in the growing area, underneath the armpits, anywhere, it's hot and moist, you're going to have that 100% absorption. Now, Another thing that we probably don't realize, but how many times a day do we touch our face? What is the average? Now, this is like in a 24-hour period. We're not thinking about just an 8-hour work day. But in a period of day, it's been recorded that people can touch their faces up to 5,000 times. That's not everybody, but, some's more, some's less. But think about it. We're out working in the heat, in the humidity here in North Carolina. It's bad. So what are we constantly doing during the day? We are constantly wiping our brows. We're constantly picking up a towel, paper towel, whatever, or even just our hands, constantly wiping the sweat off our forehead and off our brow. If that pesticide is on our hands, we could possibly touch, probably during the workday, 1,500 times or whatever, just 1, 2, 3 right there. And we do that over and over again. We've got to make sure that our hands are clean. You get it on your forehead, you're sweating, then it rolls into the eyes. So we're always continuously having to think when we're applying these pesticides and not get it into our body. With systemic effects, these are pesticides that will target animals. Insecticides, again, is the nervous system. Basically, they're going to shake themselves to death. The rodenticides, they are going after the circulatory system, so they'll actually bleed out. And with the insecticide symptoms, and think about these, and what else does it compare to? Nausea, boom, right off the bat is a heart attack. When somebody is getting very sick and wanting to vomit, and difficulty breathing that we're going to have here, just right there on the bottom line, I'm thinking, cardiac arrest. You got to see what it is that they're doing. Do you see a backpack sprayer? Do you see a hose laying on the ground? Then it's going to be a pesticide exposure. But there can also be diarrhea, headache, dizziness, weakness, excessive sweating, tearing, chills, thirst, chest pain, the breathing difficulty, body aches, and cramps. And those body aches and cramps can also be signs and symptoms of, heat exposure or heat stroke. So all of this can be very, very dangerous. And nothing's more scarier than grasping for air and not being able to breathe. With allergic effects, contact or systemic, meaning, contact's going to be where it's at. Systemic, it's actually inside the body. You can develop dermatitis, blisters, and hives. You can also go into life-threatening shock, which means, the body is not getting oxygen out to where it needs. If it's a systemic effect and it starts affecting your breathing or whatever, people will go into shock because they're not getting the oxygen that they need. You can get red, itchy eyes, respiratory discomfort, more like an asthma attack or whatever. But again, when somebody is grasping for air, nothing is more scarier than that. It's like drowning, not in the water. Now, here we have the routes of entry on our skin. Dermal. 97% of all body exposure during spraying is by skin contact. And here we have a technician. It looks like he was in the old school Navy with the dungaree pants and light blue shirt, but he was spraying a chemical and held those same hands underneath a blue light. And everywhere we see this white area is where the young man has pesticide residue. Well, just think about that. Let's say he has washed his hand. He thought he did a great job. We're in a hurry. We're trying to get to lunch. We're trying to get work done. We're not washing our hands thoroughly underneath warm water and using soap and drying them correctly. What if he was to go and grab that sandwich mom made him this morning? Or if he goes to put in a chew of tobacco, he's touching it, or even bubble gum, a cigarette, anything, grabbing his Coke can or whatever, and he wipes off the bottle before he drinks it. He has now got dermal pesticides entering the body. And so which do you think is more dangerous? It getting inside of you? Yes, it is going to be very, very detrimental to him. And so with this little diagram here, different parts of your body vary in their ability to absorb pesticides. Scalp and forehead, look at that, 32% for the scalp, scratching our head. Forehead, we're wiping it 24/7, up to 5,000 times a day. You're doing that, 36%. Ear canal, 40%. Your armpit, 64%. Your forearm and your palm, 9 and 12. The back of hand, 21. Abdomen, 18. But the genital area, 100%. Wash your hands. Wash your hands before and after using the bathroom when you're applying pesticides. The ball of your foot, 13%. Now, I have literally seen guys spraying, Roundup in flip-flops and shorts, walking through wet grass. Their feet are wet automatically. They step into the shrub bed where they've actually sprayed, or they're even applying, a broadleaf herbicide on lawns. I've seen it all, and I don't understand why these guys don't do it. I know they want to look cool, but guys, you can't be too protective when messing with these pesticides. I do not want to have my feet wet and then step in pesticide and have that residue on it. I'm making sure my feet are clean and dry. Greater dermal absorption, warm, moist areas, the groin, armpits, head, and neck. We also, deal with tools and mowers. Our fingers are going to have nicks and cuts, abrasions. We may have a little bit of poison ivy or whatever. We're always dealing with this stuff. We're outside every single day. If we get that exposure on these cuts or on these rashes that's opened up because we've been scratching it, the chemical is now inside of us. Pesticide formulations affect the absorption. So the least absorbed would be our granular. We're pushing out our fertilize. Next would be our water-based or wettable powders. And then the most absorbed would be our emulsifiable concentrates, our ECs. And so we use all three in lawn care. All three. When it comes to our lungs, inhalation. We can do this when we're mixing our wettable powders. We're dumping them into the tank. That dust flies back in our face. We got dust that we may use. What if we're using gas or even the vapors, from the pesticides we're applying? And then even the spray itself can actually, come back into our face or whatever, and we can breathe that in. We're more danger of it with mixing and loading. And then with during applications is probably, a lot safer. But we still may have to wear more PPE when mixing and loading. And usually if that's the case, it's going to be that apron that's going to go all the way past the knees. It's going to come up and wrap around us. And we may have to wear more of the goggles or even that full face shield when actually mixing. But protect yourself from the inhalation. Fumigants are an active gas. Now, we very seldom do that. If we're doing that, it could be in a greenhouse. But we're going to have that private applicator's license. We're going to have the farmer license, as I call it, if we're going into our greenhouse. Or, if you guys have a structural license and you're going in to fumigate for, fleas that actually get into the house or whatever, you would definitely be wearing some type of mask like that as you set them off and then, leave the property while it's doing its job. With the eyes, they are able to absorb surprisingly large amounts of chemical, even though they're super small. But again, we're constantly doing this and wiping our forehead. Any of that residue can get down into our eyes. With oral, again, wash your hands before eating, drinking, smoking, or going to the bathroom or breaks. Now, here we have the young man, again, with the blue light. He's got some there on his forearm. He's got some on his right hand. But look, he's got some in his mustache. He not washed his hands good enough, and he's probably, done something like this or actually, brought a sandwich up to his face, and now he has it there underneath his lip. That is not a good place. He not only takes a chance of it getting in his mouth and getting into the digestive tract, but it's underneath his nose. He's starting to breathe that fumes in, and it's getting into the lungs and into the bloodstream that way. Possible harmful effects, acute effects, chronic effects, and even delayed effects. Acute, this is going to happen really, really fast. And, the delayed effects are going to happen, possibly even years later. With the acutes, they can occur from a single exposure. They develop within 24 hours of the exposure, and any effect can be measured. Toxicity usually expressed as lethal dose 50 or lethal concentrate 50, where meaning 50% of the population is killed. So, does this really mean a lot to us? Not necessarily, because they're not using humans to test this, the chemical on. They're using lab rats, but still, if it's killing 50% of the rats, it's going to do, it's going to do us some harm. And look here, he's mixing and loading. You can actually see the droplets coming out of the tank. He's knocked it over. He has no iPro on. He has no respirator, no apron, no gloves or nothing. So a very dangerous situation right here for the farmer. And I think farmers actually are probably the worst ones not to wear the PPE, because they're on their property. They're not thinking an agricultural inspector is going to show up, or an OSHA inspector. And they're just not really thinking like we are. And as the business owners, we have to protect our employees, and we have to make sure that they have everything that they have. Mr. Bragg, you got a question?
Yeah, I just wanted, you mentioned LD50, as far as it compares to us. I would say compare it and look up the LD50 for Clorox, and how much Clorox is used out there in the world, and how much Roundup is used out in the world is a totally different thing.
Yeah.
It also helps with understanding that versus everything use, and also dealing with clients.
Yeah. Yep. And right here we have, a good chart with it. Whereas, LD50 is the dose of a substance that kills 50% of the population of test animals, measured in milligrams of toxic per kilogram of body weight. And so here we have a dose of 100, 10, and 100 is going to kill 96, 10 killed 50, and 1 milligram, there was 12 dead. And then your LC50, concentration of a substance in air or water that kills 50% of a test population measured in parts per million. They do have the limitations, as we said earlier, because they only measure death rates, not the less serious acute effects, which are bad. Death is the worst, but still, LD50 and LC50 are not taking into consideration the other effects that we may have down the road. They do not translate directly to the humans, and they only measure effects of a single exposure, not multiple exposures. And, as lawn care technicians, we are doing it, every round, every application, every season, every year, multiple times. So the repeated use is happening. With the chronic effects, low dose exposures over an extended period of time, birth defects, toxicity to a fetus, production of tumors, even genetic changes, blood disorders, nerve disorders, and reproductive effects. And this slide right here really makes me want to stress the use of a uniform service, because I don't want any of my technicians, because they're young guys, I don't want them going home, to their girlfriends, to their wives, because we may or may not know, we should know, being their boss, that they're going to be an expectant father, but we don't want them to take those clothes home, where they've been applying a pesticide, and they come home and they wash their clothes in the same washing machine. And it's okay to do that, but are they typically going to do what they need to do to clean that washer after cleaning their uniforms? They're going to wash it, throw it in the dryer, and you can do that, but you need to run another empty load to clean out the washer before you put other stuff in. Some are even saying to do that, run the cycle twice, but they don't have the time for that, especially mom. If she's pregnant, she's got other young kids, she's not going to do that. So if she's pregnant, we don't want them carrying those chemicals home. We don't want the newborn to have a chance of being exposed to dad's uniform, because what's a young kid going to do when dad walks into the house? He's going to hug him. He's going to run up to him. We don't want that to happen. Let these guys change at the shop, put on their clean clothes. We call them civilians, civvies, and wear those back to the house. And, give them a place to clean up there in the shop, just a large, wash tub or whatever that they can wash their hands and arms and their face, and then change their clothes. Off they go, and none of that gets carried back home. With your delayed effects, this is going to happen after 24 hours and after repeated exposures. So it could be over a long time. Example, the organophosphates in the carbamate insecticides, repeated exposure to that, you might start developing some nervous system effects, where the twitching, the actual movement that you can't control. And so recognize symptoms of exposure. This will vary according to the pesticide and the individual. Here we have a young man. You can definitely see the rash, the forehead, underneath his eyes and stuff. He's complaining of a headache. He's getting nauseous, and he's getting dizzy. And, he's looks like he's got a shirt on. So, and he's in an office type building, but did he make an application that morning? Is he back there in the office doing estimates or whatever? You got to ask these questions. What really scares me is the nauseousness and the dizziness. We probably need to know a little bit about the medical condition, of our employees, and hopefully they're honest with us, and we're not having to ask them, and they're bringing forth this information, say, hey, Eric, I've been diagnosed with this, I may have trouble applying some of these pesticides, or, if what they're diagnosed with, you don't want to confuse that with a pesticide exposure. You want to be able to take care of them the way possible, and by knowing any issues that they may have. If exposure does occur, administer first aid. You want to dilute the pesticide. So if it's on the skin, remove the contaminated clothing, wash the skin, gently dry, and then loosely cover. So you may want to take out the pocket knife and actually cut that off of them. And if it's a uniform, big deal. We can get that actually replaced. If it's in the eyes, you want to wash across the eyes for at least 15 minutes. If it's inhaled, get the victim to fresh air and laid down. If ingested, induce vomiting, except when it's if it's going to burn the esophagus tract again. You may want to administer that activated charcoal and water, and that is going to make them get it up very, very quickly. But it is one of the petroleum-based pesticides that you don't want actually coming back up again. And do not use syrup of ipecac. It is ineffective when dealing with these pesticides. And so you also don't want to induce vomiting when the victim is unconscious or convulsing. And the petroleum products, like I said, kerosene, gasoline, oil were involved, even if it's an emulsifiable concentrate. And then, your corrosive poisons or strong acids or bases were ingested. So, you've got to have that label to figure out what it is that they were applying. So, keeping that 3-ring binder in the truck, keeping an inventory of what your technicians have, you're going to be able to give the correct first aid. And then always seek medical attention. Take the label with you. Keep extra copies of the label and material safety data sheets in your vehicle and your office for emergencies. Always post emergency numbers. Here you have the National Poison Control Center, 800-222-1222. We should probably remember that number. And then there is the National Pesticide Information Center, the NPIC, 1-800-858-7378. And then there is the actual website, and that's for Oregon State, which some of these slides did come from it. But good information from actually Washington State and Oregon State puts out a lot of information for pesticides. With heat stress caused by heat, not pesticide exposure, wearing all this extra PPE does, increase our risk. It's hot. The guys are trying to get done. They may, move a little bit faster. They see they've got several more houses to go on their route sheet. They are ready to get done and they're hustling. Well, they're going to get hot because they are wearing the respirator. They are having to wear the goggles, the long sleeve shirts, the long pants, and those boots get kind of heavy towards the end of the day. Symptoms are going to be fatigue, dizziness, altered behavior. They may have clammy skin or even hot, dry skin. They're going to develop the headache, nauseous, and even chills. When you start getting chills, that's a bad sign when it's 90+ degrees out there. They're going to have severe thirst, and then they're either going to have heavy sweating or a lack of sweating. When it's a lack of sweating, they're in trouble. When they're sweating, they're still trying to cool. The body's still trying to cool itself off. When they stop sweating, they're definitely in trouble. And so, as a technician, you want to see a doctor annually. You want to take the precautions needed. You want to get regular exercise, eat a balanced diet, and drink water. We're all guilty of not drinking enough water. That's pretty much what I'm doing now. I've cut out the soft drinks and pretty much just sip water all day long. Wash your hands and face regularly. I keep a washcloth in the truck. I keep, hand soap in the truck. I want to make sure that I can actually clean myself up when I'm around the pesticides, or really anything. We've got water coolers, we've got bottles of water, so we can actually wash the hands and face pretty easily. And again, keep our food and our drinks and our candies and our snacks and the guys that dip and smoke, you want to keep it away from your application equipment, and you want to keep it away from the pesticides. Keep a lock box in the back of the truck. Keep those pesticides in there locked up and in a container that's not going to, allow them to leak. And so in summary, again, our hazards is equivalent to toxicity times exposure. We're going to be exposed through contact, systemic, or allergic effects. Routes of entry can be our skin, our eyes, mouth, lungs. Always try to use the least toxic pesticides, and always wear and use the PPE. And then know the symptoms of acute and chronic exposure, and, learn CPR and first aid when it comes to this. And so, the heat exhaustion out there, guys, the heat stroke, and with the combination of the pesticides, and, the way we eat, we're not healthy eaters. When we work all the time, it's drive-through food and stuff. So, know the signs and symptoms of, cardiac arrest, heart attack, for your guys out there, and just keep a good eye on them. Questions, comments, or concerns? Or does everybody want to watch the
Well, you know me, I always got to say something.
That's all right, Mr. Bragg.
When I was younger, I took on a bunch of different jobs. I run a D3 inside a barge while a chipper was filling it, wearing respirators and whatnot. Been around this sort of thing all the time. Worked in greenhouses where you stayed up all night just banging ice off of it so it didn't, implode on top of you.
Yeah.
But the worst thing I had, and the reason I can't eat peaches no more, was the protective gear that I had to put on and the mix that was put in to protect a peach was crazy. And the time of year is right in the heat. And so we could only spray for about, I think it was like 25 minutes. And then you had to take pretty much a 15-minute break because it took you 15 minutes to get out of your gear before you could spray again. And I had seen guys drop out. And just like you said, is it the pesticide or is it the heat? And is it all the gear? Or is it, you know, South Georgia? You know, it is what it is. But they always had them young guys because them young guys don't have the fear. But it teaches you real quick that, this is a big deal and you really need to follow directions. And these big companies, they had a lot of backup programs where everything washed you down right away. And like you say, your boots, your gloves, your suit, your respirator, it had a number on it, and you didn't see that till probably the third or fourth time you sprayed again.
Yeah.
But yeah, can't eat peaches. All right.
Any other comments, questions? Because it is
What's
good
the
basketball.
I do have one question.
Yeah.
What's the if you do have employees that spray and do become sick, are you held liable legally if they get sick?
Well, it depends. If they're licensed, it's really both of you is going to be responsible, because anytime there's like an accident, they'll hold the owner and, you know, the licensed applicator responsible. But if he's working underneath your direct supervision, you know, that term direct supervision means that, you know, you should have been there, you know, watching it, or at least kind of monitoring the situation back and forth to different jobs. And you needed to be, I forget what the mileage is or the distance. If they call you, you have to be there within so many minutes or within so many miles. I'll have to look that up. But yes, if they're, you know, even if they're, you know, the PPE is provided, you still got to make sure that they're wearing it. You still got to make sure. It's just like we got hit the other day with an OSHA fine. You know, I don't know how many times the guys have, you know, they didn't have the harness on in the lift, and OSHA came by, was cool, and, like, you know, worked with them and stuff. But still, my guys were not going to do it. Guess who gets to pay the fines? You know, me. So, you know, and I should have been there. I should have said, hey, you know, Ethan, put the thing on, you know, or you're going to go home. You know, next time I pull up, you don't have the harness on and you're in the aerial lift, you're going home for the day. So, we as the owners, you know, we're responsible.
Thank you.
Yep. I see that Clemson flag in the back hanging on your wall.
Yeah. You must be a Gamecock fan.
No, hell no. No. You know, no. I love Clemson, you know. You know, was taking online classes there when we were deployed, and it got hurt, and I never did finish that master's there, but I've always been a Demon Deacon fan. So, and nobody can hate us for liking Wake Forest because we're not going to beat anybody. So we're the most neutral team in the ACC.
That's right.
But you got the best golf program out there.
They do, and they lost baseball just a few minutes ago.
Oh,
they lost.
I know
They won. They were 3-0 Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and they took Monday off, and then they played UNCG today, and they just lost. So,
yeah, they had 2 grand slams one game.
Yep. So, hopefully they get back to the World Series. I think they will.
Yeah.
And so, they play Pitt tonight in basketball, 9:00. So, but I'm not going. I am planting myself on the couch and watching it. So, all right, guys.
Quick off-topic question: do you think that Celsius is going to go away because of the whole dicamba ban? You know?
Is what going to go away?
Celsius.
I don't know. That is a good question. It's possible, ain't it?
So I saw that they had banned, I think it was 3 or 4 different pesticides.
Yeah.
Like based. So I hope not.
Oh, I know.
Everything that works.
Yeah. Get rid of what works. That's right. That's typically what the government will do. So I don't know. I will look into that. I need to run by a Green Resource and talk to those guys and kind of see. So all right, now that does conclude course number 2684, Pesticide Hazards in Landscape and First Aid. Please go back directly underneath this lecture, and you will see the quiz that you need to take in order to generate your proof of attendance. You will be able to download your proof of attendance. It'll have your name, license number, and the date that you completed the course, and we will notify the NCLCLB of your completion of this course. During the busy season, which we consider anywhere from April to June, we're going to be sending these rosters in on every Friday. During the month of July, we pretty much will do the rosters on a daily basis. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns on the course, please send me an email to ejones@turfteacher.com, or you can send me a text or call me at area code 336-414-9719. Thanks, guys, and I hope to see you in the next lecture.